My grandparents, who were born in Germany, married in the city of Essen, never had to wear a yellow star because they fled Germany in 1938, and the star wasn't required to wear the star until September of 1941. But in order to get a visa to enter this country, for her, my grandfather, and my father, she had to get an abortion. So in a country where the procedure was neither safe nor legal, she risked her life to save her family. So there's a certain chilling juxtaposition this week, for me personally, where the past and the present come together. Cantor sang Eli, Eli in recognition of the United Nations declared International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was yesterday. Tonight and tomorrow is declared Repro Shabbat by the National Council of Jewish Women. Repro Shabbat is dedicated to the cause of reproductive freedom. It's inspired by this week's Torah portion, where the classic Torah law that makes it clear that the termination of a pregnancy, at least from the perspective of the Torah, is not murder, has informed Jewish thought for centuries. The Jewish consensus has been that the mother's health and well-being takes precedence over the life of the fetus. So you might think I'm making a strange juxtaposition of these 2 days that seem to have not a lot to do with each other. But as you'll see beyond my personal story, there's an unfortunate connection, and one that is, as they say, not good for the Jews. For decades, we have worked hard to ensure that the memory and the lessons of the Holocaust aren't lost with the deaths of its survivors. We've lobbied governments internationally to create Holocaust memorials. We've created Holocaust museums throughout the Western world. We've brought Holocaust studies to universities to make sure that world history includes the study of the Holocaust. We demand that Yom HaShoah and Holocaust Remembrance Day are observed. We've even established organizations in memory of, in the legacy of the Holocaust, that call out subsequent genocides against other peoples, because we realize that the expression "never again" doesn't just apply to us. So as a community, we are determined to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust are taught to the world. Good for us, really good for us. Im ein ani li mili, Hillel said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But unfortunately, the terrible uniqueness and qualitative and quantitative exceptionality of the Nazi Holocaust is being usurped by many in our generation, those who misappropriate its imagery for their own causes. So these distorted and poorly informed and, dare I say, anti-Semitic references to the Holocaust are being invoked from all corners of society. In a sick twist, distorting this year's juxtaposition of Repro Shabbat and Holocaust Remembrance Day, opponents of abortion speak of an abortion Holocaust, complete with Nazi imagery. They call doctors and pro-choice advocates Nazis. You've seen it, you know this. But they're not alone in their rhetorical atrocities. Those who take issue with Israel's policies on the West Bank don't hesitate to accuse Israel of using Gestapo tactics. Now, I too oppose many of Israel's policies, but to accuse the Jewish state, founded from the ashes of the Holocaust, of adopting the practices of the very murderers who killed the people that gave rise to the nation, is the worst form of anti-Semitism. There are plenty of ways to challenge Israeli governmental policies that don't desecrate the memory of the 6 million. And unfortunately, Nazi references, even in the state of Israel, are heard from one Jew to another, even, dare I say, on the floor of the Knesset. Shame on them. But there's more. The cultural war over COVID has also opened the door for Holocaust denigration. We are now told that a COVID-19 vaccine card is this era's yellow star. That is as offensive as it is ludicrous. The yellow star was forced on Jews who had to wear it by a genocidal regime. and its goal was to identify a people for extermination. When an anti-vaxxer puts a yellow star on her shirt and writes "not vaccinated" inside of it, it not only distorts history, but it leads the world to conclude that that yellow star, that horrible yellow star, which my grandmother fled Nazi Germany to avoid, is not a uniquely vile symbol of history, but it's a meme that can be tossed around and appropriated for any cause. Such misuse, whether it's through ignorance or malicious intent, is also a desecration of the memory of the 6 million, and I dare say it is anti-Semitic. COVID restrictions have been compared to the 1935 Nuremberg laws. It's an equally dangerous misrepresentation of history to equate the life-saving actions of a democratic nation with the murderous intentions of an autocratic criminal regime is reprehensible, folks. And yes, it too is a form of not-so-veiled anti-Semitism through Holocaust trivialization. The US is not Germany. The attempt to save lives, even if you find the restrictions onerous, is the definitional opposite of the Nazi goal. But there's more. We have now needle Nazis for the people who give shots, corona Nazis for those who enforce procedures. Medical brown shirts has been used, comparing our health-giving personnel to the uniformed terrorists of Nazi Germany. Dr. Fauci and other professionals have been likened to Joseph Mengele. Swastikas and German-style fonts abound on signs held up at anti-vaxxer rallies. And so it goes. Extremists and activists on both ends of the political spectrum think nothing about misappropriating the Holocaust. It becomes ammunition for some kind of hyperbolic condemnation of whatever the particular carrier of the slogan finds disagreeable. And there's a moral to this story. The moral is, despite all the work we've done for decades, all the efforts to memorialize, to study, to educate, to draw lessons about the world's most horrific genocide, despite all we've done, the message is getting muddled in our generation. Quite simply, to invoke the image of the Holocaust about anything but the Holocaust, or for any event short of actual genocide, or about any government short of a malicious autocracy, is to resort to a form of insidious anti-Semitism that minimizes Jewish martyrdom, that twists the legacy of the perpetrators and their victims into some trivial cause for the moment. And anyone who does so should be called out, should be condemned, and should be recognized for what they are: perpetrators of anti-Semitic tropes. And if they're in a position of power and leadership, they should be sanctioned and marginalized. I'm not mincing words here, because it's that important. And when we ignore them, when we minimize that behavior, when we fail to challenge that rhetoric, we are violating, desecrating the memory of the victims of the Shoah. And the ability that we have struggled for so many decades to do, which is to draw meaningful lessons from that horrific time in human history. And if the perpetrator of such a misappropriation is Jewish, well, truly, shame on that person. If we don't speak up, if we don't push back, we, the people who carry the legacy inside of us, and if we don't try to educate those who will listen, because there are still some who can be educated, and let's be clear, if they'll listen, we'll talk. Then who will? So to finish Rabbi Hillel's famous aphorism, Im ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? He goes on to say, Im lo achshav ein matai, if not now, when? When is now? The time to speak up is now. As my father always said, laws of free speech don't allow you to endanger others by falsely yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, was his favorite expression. There are limits to free speech. That's what that expression teaches. And it's on us to push back against those who cross the line. not only on behalf of our Jewish martyrs, but also for future generations who still need to learn the timeless lessons of that time in history. Ken Yeh Ratzon, so may it be.